Hi. Last week I referred to a working paper that had been produced out of the University of Cambridge, and I wanted to discuss that this week. Now, unfortunately, I'm not allowed to quote from that paper nor distribute that paper in any part. There's certain copyright issues and requests of the authors that it can only be quoted or distributed with the permission of those authors. Now, I'm not going to quote from that paper. What I am going to say is that paper is supportive of things that I've already discussed in terms of redundancy and how to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic and the financial economic consequences that are following that are running parallel now and that are going to become very, very difficult for employers and employees once we come out of the government financial support with the furlough payment scheme. We can see that on the cards there are already massive numbers of redundancies. There has been an increase in people claiming benefits through unemployment over the past few months. Indeed, we have now surpassed the 2 million mark, which hasn't been the case since the mid-1990s. So for many of us, in our lifetime, in our working lifetime, we have never experienced such a situation as we are in now. And it seems to me that we need to be looking at how we can handle these things better. Now, I've discussed many times really that when it comes to looking at redundancies, and it's very, very likely that many smaller organizations, businesses, companies are going to be going into that situation where we are going to have to start looking at redundancies. We have to start thinking in terms of how we can avoid them. Indeed, the consultation process that is a legal requirement is something that is designed to facilitate discussion on how we can avoid redundancies, not a case of, right, we're going to make some people redundant, let's have a chat, yeah, we're still going to make some people redundant. There are ways and means that we can look to avoid that. And one of the things that I've discussed several times is how we can look at a more flexible workforce that doesn't get dispensed with as a result of the economic crisis, but does have to change in response to this economic crisis. When it comes to being able to work, we are much more elevated in our self-esteem than not being able to work. It's a given. It's been studied many times over the history of employment, and certainly going back to something in the region of 100 years. The mental impact of unemployment. Now, I've been made redundant twice in my life, and I know how difficult it is. The emotional trauma that someone goes through when they're made redundant, that sense of loss, that sense of bereavement. You've lost more than just your income, more than just your livelihood. You've lost a large part of your identity. You are no longer what you were and identified as being within your area of employment. You have effectively been dumped. That's how you feel, and you're bereaved. Now, I don't think that any employer would take any pleasure in going through that situation and making people unemployed, making people redundant. And so what I'm doing is I'm encouraging employers to start thinking in terms of how they can be more flexible in the way that we approach the potential of redundancies. So that if we are having to cut back on our business because of the financial crisis that is running parallel and will most certainly follow the coronavirus crisis, if we are looking at downturns in the economy that are going to impact on how many hours we can afford to spend on employment, if we're looking at that kind of situation, then let's look at fairer ways of distributing the work rather than making people unemployed and dependent upon state benefits. Why would we want to do that when we can maintain a workforce of much the same size but working less hours or different kinds of shifts or different kinds of ways of working, where we can look at how we can reduce our hour cost and reduce the hours but not reduce in terms of people? And I think that that's a very advantageous way of looking at things, because in the longer term, for business, for the economy, what has happened in the past is when we've gone through serious economic crises, then a whole range of people have been discarded from the workforce, and a lot of their skills are then lost. As we start to come out of financial crisis, which is often the case, economies peak and trough, and as they come out of the trough and begin to ascend again towards a peak, we begin having a deficit in terms of skills, in terms of knowledge within the workforce. And that becomes something of a problem because we've discarded all that skill, we've discarded all that knowledge through a redundancy program. So let's look at not so much how we can discard those skills and that knowledge and those people. Let's look at how we can retain and improve upon by looking at more flexible ways of working. Maybe less hours, but not necessarily less people. Maybe more skills instead of restricting skills. Let's look at how we can look at a longer term future that is better for us all. Now, I want to briefly mention some other studies that came out towards the end of last week. One of them was a study undertaken by a new organisation called Pregnant Then Screwed. And their study covered something like 20,000 people that responded to this, key workers, female key workers, and their concerns were largely about childcare, the lack of childcare facilities that are making it very, very difficult for women to return to work, and certainly on the same terms as before, and the same terms as people who do not have childcare responsibilities. There are fears that we're effectively going right back to the 1970s, which is when I started work, when the world of work was very, very unequal in terms of gender equalities, even to the point of women receiving less pay for the same job. And even now, we still haven't closed that pay gap entirely, not by a long way. So when we're looking at the situations that make it very difficult for women to return to work on the same level playing field as people that do not have childcare responsibilities, we're looking at exacerbating rather than improving upon gender equality. And so I'd like us to start thinking about that kind of thing. Now, another survey that was done by the Office of National Statistics, or a report produced by them, shows that parents are twice as likely to be furloughed than non-parents. And so we're looking at all sorts of problems that are beginning to emerge. Problems of pregnant workers being suspended. That was the word that was used. Pregnant workers being suspended on the wrong terms, in that being asked to take maternity leave early, being asked to go on sick leave, all sorts of things that are not necessarily in conformity with the rules on these things. So let's start thinking about these things in more detail and be more conscious about both the short-term and long-term implications of how we are coming out of the COVID-19 lockdown situation and into the fire of an economic downturn that has not been seen for hundreds of years. We have not had such an economic downturn for, it is claimed, 300 years, and certainly not since the Depression, the Great Depression of the 1930s. Let's use our brains. Let's start talking to each other. Let's include employees in the dialogue, in the discussion on how we're going to come out of this, and employees approach your employer and start looking to open a dialogue on how we are going to come out of this. The fears and anxieties of unemployment of the employers, which are at the moment in some cases taking fairly authoritarian approaches to how they're dealing with this. If we go down that road, then we are taking our society, our employment cultures back decades in terms of our sophistication and our civilization. We as employers, we as employees can set a new standard in how we approach this crisis, and we can do these things jointly. By doing so, we will be stronger, we will be better, we will get out of this crisis, get out of the next crisis, and we will be able to thrive rather than have a cowed workforce coming back on diabolical terms that are not participatory in how we make a future positive together. Thank you for watching. Bye bye. Just a quick one to ask if you like these videos, if they are of any use to you, if they're of interest to you, please press the subscribe button on the YouTube channel and like and share on Facebook. Greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. See ya. Bye bye.